Welcome to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined by my guest today, Dr. Benoît Vermander, who is a French Jesuit, a sinologist, a political scientist, and a painter. He is currently professor of religious studies at the Purdue University, Shanghai, and he is also the author of 14 books and numerous articles related to religious studies. He has paid special attention to the cultural and spiritual trends that are shaping globalization. So, Dr. Benoît, why don't we start by talking about globalization in China? What's the impact? What's your take on that?
Globalization in China. Well, I would say globalization wouldn't have existed without China's path to development. And at the same time, China's path to development has been possible because the globalization process started at the same time, though those has been two mutually reinforcing phenomena. China has taken advantage of the way the world economy was globalizing, yes, but globalization went out more quickly because China took that chance.
And of course, this is bringing about a lot of changes in China.
Absolutely.
Unforeseen in some cases, right? One of the areas that you're looking at is corporate social responsibility.
Absolutely.
Define corporate social responsibility for us, please.
The definition of corporate social responsibility is evolving all the time. Let's think about Germany of the 19th century. Sure. The boss of a company had a special or his own definition of what his social responsibility was. It was taking good care of his employee, building churches or museums in his city, and so on and so on. When we think about today, we will think, for instance, about the way companies strike deals with other companies and the impact of it on environment and so on. So we will look, for instance, on the way Apple does its outsourcing in China, that kind of things. So the responsibility of companies is a notion that is always evolving according to culture and technological advances. In China, let's say it's still a new concept. Of course, it went out in the 19th, but at that time, China was quite reticent. It was seeing that concept of CSR as a plot by the West for restraining its development.
So social responsibility was a Western plot.
Absolutely, it was a Western plot, but it's not the case anymore.
So I want to follow up on that, but was there anything in traditional Chinese culture that fit this moving definition of social responsibility, something that they really were already aware of?
Absolutely. I would say the Confucian tradition was very strong on that. Actually, when you look at the cities in the southeast of China, there were guilds, there were associations of merchants that had strong Confucian and Buddhist overtones. And they were taking care of population in time of famines, and they were funding schools, and they had a strong sense of their corporate identity.
And so, did this survive the Cultural Revolution with these?
No, of course it didn't. But when we think about the Cultural Revolution, there is always something we forget, which is that Cultural Revolution was only 10 years long. So, of course, New China started in 1949, and you had that period of strong changes till 1966, and after you have 10 years of Cultural Revolution. It was radical change, but it was only 10 years long. Though many traditions have been reviving, even if there are changes about the interpretation of those traditions after cultural tradition. So, for instance, today, Confucianism and Buddhism are strong cultural markers in China, and they do influence the way corporate social responsibility is looked at.
Okay, good. So can I have some examples? In what way does that impact decisions that are being made at a Chinese corporation?
Well, first, as I said, it was, I would say, inculturated after 2000. Okay, so it took some time, and it was basically first inculturated by private entrepreneurs, which means it doesn't work for state-owned enterprises till now. State-owned enterprises have monopoly or oligopolies that make them extremely reticent to change.
Yes.
Well, private entrepreneurs had to deal with a market, with requests by consumers, or they wanted to internationalize and so on, though they slowly, or actually not so slowly, integrated that new concept. Another thing that made it happen.
But in what way would they integrate it? What form would this take? Would it make me, would it motivate me to pay my workers more money, to give them more time off? Would I be concerned about the quality of my product? Would I fund a museum? What impact did it have?
CSR has many aspects indeed. So one of them is safety of products and processes. So when media, for instance, pay more attention to that, or when you have consumer associations, or when consumers become very active on social networks and so on, of course you do pay more attention to safety. That's one. After that, the labor market in China is changing. So indeed you have an interest to attract the best employees, and you want them to participate. Third thing, which is very important, bosses of companies most of the time have a local encourage. They are part of that community. They want to do things for the village or the small town they are part of. And it's a good way also to strike deals with local leaders and so on. Finally, since they want to internationalize, they know that there are criteria abroad, or there is an international body of law or regulations about CSR that will make them more prone to take shares of market abroad if they are corporate citizens.
Okay. Well, now, we don't hear stories about this on the news in the United States. And so it sounds like from what you're saying then, there are tiers of organizations that a worker could work for. You've got, there's the Chinese equivalent of Google in the United States, I suppose, right? Google takes very good care of its employees.
There is no Google. There is a difference.
Well,
there are social networks, but because of political limitation, they work on a smaller scale. But you have hundreds of thousands of them.
But I mean companies that are really trying to excel at being responsible, right? And then some that aren't.
Absolutely. Well, I would like first to stress something. You know, in the West, we are far from being ideal when it comes to CSR. Think about the Volkswagen scandal. You know, the West Volkswagen has been basically cheating about software and controlling pollution. What would have been said if it was a Chinese company? Okay, so first time, let's be humble. Second point.
On the other hand, we didn't let Volkswagen off the hook here.
Absolutely, absolutely, and the role of civil society was extremely important. Often in China, it takes a big accident or something like that for having the scandal come out. That's
the recent explosions at the pier,
On the other hand, Chinese companies have incentives of their own for being responsible. I might take a concrete example if you want. China Mobile is the biggest mobile phone operator in China, well, which means a few hundred millions of consumers. They made the choice of going first toward the poor part of the population, peasants, because they thought wisely that they would grow up, their revenue would grow up, that they can deliver special services, and that having a huge share, huge basis of consumer was the best policy. So they did that. How they did that? By providing special services. For instance, health care information on their mobiles, information on the price of agricultural products, and so on. But although they became so big that they are looking for shares abroad, so they have a system for controlling their suppliers. They send teams to their suppliers, and they look how the oil is recycled, if there are underage workers, and so on. And the ones who are taken doing that are on a blacklist, and contracts are cancelled, and the blacklist is published. So indeed, China Mobile is working as a kind of watcher, if you want, as a force that makes smaller companies look at the way they are dealing with safety and workforce. So I'm not saying that it's ideal, far from it.
Well.
But I would say that CSR is one of the elements of the way China is trying to change its developmental model. And this is what I've been looking at in this book, yes.
Now, in the U.S., we've been influenced by a lot of other cultures, particularly the Japanese influence on American management in the 80s. Do you foresee that there are developments in China that will be influencing how we run our businesses in the U.S. in the future?
I don't think we are at that stage, yes. China is looking for its own way. It hasn't found it. And in some respect, it remains quite paternalistic. What might be interesting is that it works on relationships.
Yeah.
The Japanese model is a model which is based on processes. The Chinese model is a model which is based on integrating different groups and making the workforce having a sense of identity with the objective of the enterprise. It might be used for bad purposes and for excellent good purposes. So I would say the China model is person-based compared to the Japanese model.
So does that mean that there's a strong identification between the communities and the factories, for instance?
At the local level, it is often the case, especially in the southeast of China, which had a tradition on that. It is not the case in the northeast in China, in which it is big, for instance, steel mill, state-owned company. So when we speak about China, let's always remember that there are extremely different local cultures.
It's essentially the size of a continent, right?
Absolutely.
And,
so Sichuan and Jiangnan, I mean the southeast of China, and Inner Mongolia, and so on and so on, have utterly different cultures and traditions.
Yeah, and so they're impacting the
Absolutely.
changes in different ways.
The way also they are doing business, they are dealing with their workers, and so on and so on. So that's really important.
So just before we go to break here, how would you compare them to where the U.S. was at historically? Would you say they're the U.S. in 1950 at this point? Can you make that comparison even?
I think we can make this comparison when it comes to pollution and social relationship. It will be end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s.
Yes.
But there is a very strong factor, which is the mastership of technological changes. And on that, China might be ahead of the States. So
explain that a little bit.
Well, I mean, China is a country which development is driven by the integration of technological changes at all levels, which means that often when you go to a newly created Chinese plant, you will find it more modern than in the States. Or the use of mobile networks, social network by Chinese, is more intense today than it is the case in the United States.
In some ways, they're ahead of us. Yes.
Actually, everyone now in the world is copying the model of WeChat.
Really?
Even WhatsApp has been copied in part on WeChat. So on that respect, we cannot compare. When it comes to specific production linked to the production process as social relationship and pollution, indeed, it's something like the beginning of the 60s, yes.
Okay, very good. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and the Calumet Roundtable will be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. My guest today is Benoît Vermander, and he is here to talk to us about corporate social responsibility in China for a while, and then he's also an observer of Chinese religious culture, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. But first, Dr. Vermander, let's go back to corporate social responsibility. What about when it comes to environmental standards and environmental concerns? How does the Chinese corporate culture view itself in terms of that?
They took some time before taking it as part of their responsibility.
Yeah.
A Chinese boss thinks that the first thing he has to secure is job opportunities,
Yes.
whatever the costs.
Yeah.
So for a long time, environment was not a concern.
Okay.
But now it has come out of the closet. I mean, it's really maybe the first concern. Everyone knows that air quality is absolutely terrible, that the quality of soil is detrimental even to food safety, and so on and so on. So
even soil.
Even soil. Soil actually has an extremely high proportion of lead into it. Though even the quality of harvest in more than 1/3 of Chinese soil is extremely poor. So let's say environment and safety cannot be separated. So nobody can exaggerate the size of the Chinese environmental problems. But let's understand two things. First, the Chinese know it. So it has become one of the first concerns for Chinese citizens themselves. Second, the quality of the standard, the level of the standard is quite high. I mean, Chinese state is now implementing quite high-level standards, but the problem is that the standards often are not respected in reality.
Right. And what's bringing the pressure to cause the environment to get all this attention?
Well, first, it's scandals or problems that come at some point when you have a lake of a river being highly polluted, when a disaster happens, and so on.
So there are scandals in China.
There are scandals in China, and when one scandal happens, it is widely repercuted. So when there is a problem with a train accident because there was a safety standard not repercuted, or when a lake has been polluted by chemicals and so on, everybody will speak about it for 2 weeks, more or less.
Okay.
And some measures are taken, and after that, it's forgotten. China is a very volatile society.
Yes.
People speak a lot about something happening, but they may forget quite rapidly about it. The second, of course, factor that makes environment an extremely important concern is healthcare statistics and the importance of cancers and the importance of other illnesses that are linked to air, soil quality.
Well, so is this more of a humanitarian concern, or is this
No, it's a concern for oneself first. I will say that concern for oneself.
Right. Yeah.
Though people care about their health, they do see that healthcare cost is extremely important. They do see that the number of premature deaths linked to air pollution is extremely high, and so they care about it and they speak about it, and they ask cities especially to implement higher levels. Now, there are gaps from one social class to another. I would say the urbanites, people living in the core of the city, are the ones who are more concerned about it. Okay?
Yeah.
But it is also the case of some villages in which there is a chemical plant, and you see within 10 years the rate of cancer going up. And a few years ago, you had often villages, peasants, burning down the Communist Party headquarters in the village or going against the plant. It's now rather under control, but it was quite a common phenomenon, I would say 7 to 10 years from now, before.
Okay, interesting. So it's in transition at this point, you would say?
It is in transition. Social consciousness is rising. Cities are doing things, but even a city like Shanghai developed quite a comprehensive plan last year because the level of pollution was very high. They said very honestly it will take 10 years before we really get to a normal state. And it is true, and it will be true in any country. You know, when a plant is nearby a river, you know, you just cannot close it in one day, and so on and so on. When plants are located in Zhejiang province, on which Shanghai can do nothing, but with the wind, indeed, a good part of the pollution comes from Zhejiang province, you have to negotiate, and so on and so on.
Well, and obviously the U.S. goes back and forth on this. One party gets into the Oval Office and the standards are relaxed, another party gets in and the standards go back up again. And
let me tell you something else that shows the situation in Shanghai. Shanghai might have the best developed common transportation system in the world with an incredible metro system. But at the same hand, you have 8,000 new cars every month on the roads of the city.
Really?
Yes.
8,000 a month.
8,000 new cars. And they control it as much as they can. Only 5% of applications for new car licenses are accepted.
Really?
But still, the demand is so strong
Yeah.
that you do have every month 8,000 new cars on the
I will
roads of the
stay off
city.
the streets if I visit, yeah.
Take the metro, it's a very good one.
Yeah, that sounds like a good,
That's
good
what I do.
recommendation. What about social standards in the workforce in China? Where is that at right now?
They used to be extremely poor, okay?
Yes.
But now the supply is shrinking. So since 2009, exactly, there has been a series of strikes in 2009. It has been raising up. Plus the fact that China wants to go from being the workshop of the world, I mean, many, many plans to going to being a service economy.
Really?
So yes, of course, future is in that, you know. So plants being for clothes or whatever do go to Southeast Asia in big part. Vietnam. Tomorrow, what you will buy in America will be made in Vietnam, won't be made in China. You know, that kind of thing. So there is a shift in economy that encourages the government to let workshop ask for better standards. Another fact is, of course, many, many companies in China are international companies.
Yes.
Though they do have also to answer to international standards or to pressure from international work help association.
Yeah. You know, in the United States, I think working conditions were probably, in my lifetime anyway, at a low in the 60s.
Yes.
And I think, you know, it may be because we came out of the Depression and World War II, and people were happy to have jobs.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the bosses said, do this, and so you did it. If you didn't do it, you lost your job.
Absolutely.
And we got into the 70s and the 80s, and people started saying, well, I don't have to work here. I'll work somewhere else. And I think that helped drive some of the change. What about the need for jobs in China? Are there people, you know, like us in the Depression who will do anything?
Yeah, what you described was very much China till, let's say, 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
There is a transition there, but this transition is also contradictory. On the one hand, indeed, Chinese are becoming more picky, but on the other hand, the level of education, formation, jobs opportunity is diversifying. And now, lower level university graduates have a strong problem in finding jobs, okay? But there is still a very low unemployment rate for the same reason as in the States, which means a lot of very flexible jobs, okay? Which is very different from Europe, of course. So in some respect, I would say the job market in the States and in China are quite comparable.
Interesting. So it's kind of a market-driven situation today. Well, and then what about gender equality?
Gender equality, China always prided itself to be quite equal country when it comes to that. It's not true at every level. For instance, when it comes to the political bureau or central committee, no woman in the political bureau and very few women in the central committee.
Right.
Okay. A few China women bosses too, but I saw that the number of China women millionaires or billionaires is actually higher than in other countries, including in the States. So
really?
There is a room for women. So officially, equality is stringently applied. In practice, there are still many discriminatory practices, but which are not recognized as such. Okay, but there is a space for women highly educated for being, for finding their own way in the industry or services market. Yes. There is one.
Okay, and then just one other area before we move on. What about conflict management?
China is quite poor at that. I would say even historically speaking, China always strives toward harmony, which is as such is good things, but harmony requires indeed to handle conflicts.
Yes.
And there is an ideal of harmony which somehow negates or hides conflict often in China. So indeed it always works by explosions, you know, things are tied till the time they explode, which is not very healthy.
No.
So China certainly needs to learn the art of peace building They know it, but it's very hard to make a culture move in that respect, yes.
So some more communication classes, perhaps.
Communication classes
yes,
are very much welcome.
My
yes,
department is ready to expand. So just lastly then, so now that we've sort of explored the social responsibility side, let's come back to the religious side for a second. What impact is Christianity having on this? What impact is their interfacing with the rest of the world having on social responsibility?
Huge impact. On social responsibility, not so much. Okay, that's the problem. There is a huge religious increase, everybody knows that, since the middle of the 80s. So China is a religiously striving country.
Yes.
Christianity first, but Buddhism almost at the same level, and other religions as well. Now the problem, it seems to me that those believers for the time being are still quite inward looking. So they want to foster small groups, to foster a spirit of fellowship, but they still have problems in identifying their social responsibility. It is true that the state doesn't give them much space for that. Now, when it comes to Protestant churches, Protestant bosses are developing foundations, but that's more the philanthropic kind, It's not about their social responsibility proper.
Right.
Though the encounter between religions and society at large is something which is also on the move, on the shaping in China today, which is very interesting to follow, actually.
Yes. So the average Chinese worker, if I can say this, how religious is the average Chinese worker? What would you compare them to?
It doesn't go by social classes. Actually, you do have a similar rate of religious interest in different classes.
Yes.
Young people are more interested than old people, according to all surveys.
Interesting.
That's for sure. You're certainly right in the fact that I would say people living in the cities, especially in big cities, are more interested on the one hand. On the other hand, classically speaking, small villages are also quite religious. So I would say smaller city workers might be comparatively less interested, but you do have in Beijing, Shanghai, and other cities big compounds of Christian workers as well, or in more traditional parts of those cities. Buddhist temple, Taoist temple are very well attended.
All right, very good. That is all the time we have today for our program. Thank you for being on the show today. And this is the end of Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. Have a great day.